A cold morning in Jerusalem. The narrow, cobblestone streets of Jerusalem were still dim in the early morning light. The city was just waking up, but some were already awake. Like Reuven. Reuven, 57 years old, was a weary man with graying beard. 5 years ago, due to financial hardship, health issues, and a series of misfortunes, he had lost his home, his job, and his family. Since then, the streets had been his only home. He had built a makeshift shelter in a corner near the old city, his attempt to keep warm through the long nights. That morning, like every morning, he sat on a piece of cardboard, an old coffee cup in front of him. He didn't look at people's feet, he watched their eyes. Years on the street had taught him how to read compassion, guilt, or indifference in a glance. But that day was different. A man walking on the sidewalk caught his attention. Wearing a dark coat, flanked by 2 bodyguards. The face was familiar. Reuven squinted. "Is that Netanyahu?" he murmured. Indeed. Former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was taking an unusual route that day. Normally, security kept him on safer paths. But he had insisted on visiting the old city to reconnect with history and walk among the people. As he passed Reuven, he suddenly paused. They made eye contact. Reuven looked away, embarrassed. But Netanyahu spoke. "What's your name?" Reuven hesitated for a moment. Then, in a low voice, "Reuven, sir." Netanyahu crouched down and gently touched his shoulder. "Reuven, have you had breakfast?" Reuven shook his head. Netanyahu's face changed. He whispered something to one of his guards, who immediately walked away. Then Netanyahu sat beside Reuven on the cold stone. A former prime minister sitting with a homeless man, passers-by stared in disbelief. "If you don't mind," Netanyahu said, "I'd like to have breakfast with you." "A warm breakfast," silent tears. Reuven couldn't remember the last time someone offered him something like this. Why would a prime minister eat with me? He thought. Yet, something about Netanyahu felt warm. Genuine. The guard returned a few minutes later with 2 bags, hot tea and sandwiches. Netanyahu placed them in front of Reuven and sat on a newspaper beside him. Reuven's hands trembled as he opened the sandwich. Netanyahu kept the conversation going. "Reuven, would you tell me a bit about your life?" Reuven sighed deeply and began. "I don't belong here. I used to have a small carpentry shop in Haifa. My wife and I worked together. We borrowed money for our daughter's education, but things went bad. Then my wife got sicker. More debt followed. Eventually, I lost the shop, then the house. She passed away. My daughter moved abroad. And I stayed here. That's how it all happened." Netanyahu nodded slowly, listening intently. "People often think poverty only comes from laziness," Netanyahu said. "But that's not true. Life isn't fair to everyone. I know that much." They shared tea. Reuven still trembled, but his eyes held a glimmer of light. Netanyahu stood up and extended his hand. "Reuven, I'd like to invite you to spend the day with me. Let's take a walk." Reuven hesitated. "But I'm dirty. Not dressed right." Netanyahu smiled. "Your worth is not in your clothes." And so, that morning, Jerusalem saw something rare. One of Israel's most powerful men walking hand in hand with a homeless man through the streets. 3. The unexpected guest. Netanyahu didn't take Reuven to an official residence. Instead, he led him to a modest stone house on the city's edge, a private property he rarely visited, known only to a few close advisors. Reuven looked hesitant. "I don't belong in a place like this." "You belong wherever you're treated like a human," Netanyahu replied. Inside, Netanyahu pulled out clean clothes. "These belong to my son. I'm sure they'll fit. Take a shower. Then we'll talk again." Reuven entered the bathroom and looked at himself in the mirror. His beard was tangled, his face dirty, but for the first time in years, there was hope in his eyes. he cried. Silently. Half an hour later, cleaned up and dressed, he returned to the living room. Netanyahu smiled. Much better. Now let's talk. They sat together. Netanyahu pulled out a notebook. Reuven, I want to help you long term. But I need to know, what do you want? Do you want a job? A room? A new life? Reuven took his time. His eyes met Netanyahu's. I just want to start again. With hands that hold hope, not stone. Netanyahu nodded. Then we begin. 4 seeds of a new beginning. Everything changed after that day. Reuven no longer lived on the streets. He stayed in the back room of Netanyahu's humble house. Everything was done discreetly, only one trusted advisor. Avner knew the full story. At first, Avner was skeptical. Sir, who is this man? Why are we doing this? Netanyahu only replied. Once, no one believed in me. But someone gave me a chance. Now it's my turn. Step 1, restore Reuven's identity. They worked with the Interior Ministry to retrieve his lost records. His full name was Reuven Asaf Levi. Years ago, he had received government funding for his carpentry business. After going bankrupt, all documentation had been lost. Step 2, health check. Netanyahu arranged a full medical evaluation. Reuven had high blood pressure, diabetes, and signs of a past lung infection, but nothing life-threatening. Returning from the hospital, Reuven cried. A doctor asked for my name today. He looked me in the eye. Treated me like a person. Netanyahu said, you are a person. You always have been. Sometimes the world just forgets. The carpenter's dream. One evening over coffee, Netanyahu asked, do you miss your old job? Reuven lowered his head. Every day. The smell of wood. The sound of cutting. I miss it. Then why don't we rebuild it? Netanyahu asked. Reuven stared. How? I have nothing. No money. No tools. No shop. But you have me. And your talent. That week, Netanyahu located and rented an old carpentry shop outside the city. Dusty, worn, but filled with potential. Reuven's eyes lit up as he entered. He touched the old wood. This smells like my past. For a week, volunteers, tradesmen, and Netanyahu's network renovated the space. On the day of reopening, the sign read, from Reuven's hands, soul crafted in wood. But the real miracle was waiting inside, his daughter, Tolya. Netanyahu had contacted her abroad. Tolya hugged her father in tears. I was never angry, Dad. I just didn't know where you were. Reuven fell to his knees. Forgive me. Netanyahu quietly stepped back. Humanity is rebuilt, like wood shaped in a shop, piece by piece. 6. A headline, Netanyahu and Reuven a quiet bond. One morning, a major newspaper ran the story. Former PM Netanyahu helps homeless man rebuild life. Family and business, quietly. Without cameras. When Netanyahu saw the article, he simply shrugged. Helping someone shouldn't need a headline. All that matters is one soul saved. But the story sparked a movement. Thousands signed up to volunteer for the homeless. Municipalities launched new projects. Social justice clubs boomed in universities. Reuven's shop overflowed with orders. Handcrafted chairs, wooden frames, custom tables. But every product came with a note. This was made with hope. If you've fallen, know that you can rise again. 14. A new mission. Months had passed since Reuven had moved into his small apartment near the outskirts of Jerusalem. Life had changed dramatically. But Reuven's heart remained tethered to the people he had once lived beside on the cold pavements. One rainy evening, he sat at his modest kitchen table, looking out at the blurred city lights. He thought about Yitzhak, the old veteran who shared half a piece of bread with him, and Miriam, the silent woman with tearful eyes who used to hum lullabies in the night. Reuven couldn't forget them. Driven by a sense of duty, he decided to do something most would consider unthinkable: go back to the streets. Not to live, but to help. With the little money he had saved from his cafe job and Netanyahu's continued discreet support, Reuven began packing food packages, bread, canned goods, clean socks, thermal blankets. One evening, Netanyahu's security officer knocked on Reuven's door. "The Prime Minister wants to see you." 15. The return to the streets. Netanyahu listened quietly as Reuven explained his plan. "I don't want to just survive anymore. I want to be the reason someone else survives." Netanyahu's eyes lit up. "I'll help." What followed was nothing short of remarkable. With Netanyahu's connections and Reuven's insight, they started a discreet night mission operation. Winter Light. Every Friday night, a black van moved silently through Jerusalem's less traveled paths. Reuven, Netanyahu, sometimes even in disguise, and 2 volunteers delivered supplies to the homeless without cameras, without speeches. The goal was never fame. It was dignity. 16. The story repeats. During one of those nights, Reuven came across a young man, maybe 23, shivering under an abandoned stairwell. His name was Eli. Reuven handed him a blanket and noticed something familiar in his eyes, that same hollow look he once carried. Reuven stayed with him that night, told him his own story. "Do you know," Reuven said, "that I once thought my life was over too. And then someone gave me a second chance." Weeks passed and Eli too started working at the same cafe. Slowly, he began rebuilding his life, just as Reuven had done. Netanyahu visited one day and met Eli. "Just as I once helped a man find light," Netanyahu said, smiling warmly. "That man now carries the light to others." 17. A public revelation. Though they had worked in the shadows for a long time, the impact of Operation Winter Light became impossible to hide. Stories leaked, anonymously at first, about a mysterious team feeding and sheltering the homeless, always leaving behind a card that read, "You are not forgotten." Eventually, a journalist caught wind and traced it back to Netanyahu and Reuven. The story broke. Headlines flooded the media. XPM Netanyahu and former homeless man secretly ate dozens on Jerusalem streets. For the first time, the world saw Netanyahu not just as a politician, but as a human being who changed someone's life. Not with power, but with compassion. 18. The Cafe of Second Chances. 1 year later, Reuven, now a manager at the cafe, renamed it Cafe HaTikva, the Cafe of Hope. It became more than a business. It became a sanctuary. Every new employee was once homeless. Every story, a testimony. And at the center of it all, a wall filled with framed photos, people who found warmth, meals, and meaning there. In the middle of the wall was a single black and white photo, Netanyahu and Reuven, sitting on a park bench, sharing coffee. 19. The legacy. Years passed. Netanyahu had long left politics. Reuven grew older, but never let go of his mission. One spring morning, he gave a speech at a small community event. He stood before a crowd of youth volunteers and said, "No one is too broken to be healed. No one is too poor to give. All it takes to change the world is a hand reaching out in the dark." XX. The final reflection. As twilight draped over Jerusalem, Reuven walked through the old alley where his journey had begun. He sat where he once slept, now clean, lit by public lights. A young girl walked by, stopped, and handed him a sandwich. He smiled. The cycle had completed itself, not in despair, but in hope passed forward. For a way, Netanyahu sat in his garden, holding a letter from Reuven. "Because of you, I learned to live again. And now, so have many others." Tears welled up in Netanyahu's eyes. For all the speeches he had ever given, this silent note said the most.